Hello, welcome to the Brungardt Law Podcast. This is Maurice Brungardt, and today's guest is Spencer Scott, retired Sergeant Major from the U.S. Marine Corps. And this podcast is dedicated to exploring what makes for good practices, policies, and laws that enable effective decision-making and leadership, and vice versa. What makes for good decision-making and leadership that enables effective practices, policies, and laws. So, Spencer, welcome to the program. Appreciate you being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your last assignment with the Marine Corps.
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be a guest on your show. Thank you very much. And just for the audience, when it comes to the laws and the procedures, I don't know how much I could contribute to the conversation there, but as for leadership, as a Marine serving 30 years in the Marine Corps, reaching the rank of Sergeant Major, and then my last billet assignment being with the Inspector General of the Marine Corps, leadership has been a cornerstone of my evaluation, my participation, and really what I've been doing for what I'd say was the last 15 years of my career. Because once you get to a certain level, you become a member of the leadership team. And then on the enlisted side, once you're there, you rarely ever leave that billet. So,
tell us a little bit about, for example, when you got started with the Marine Corps, back to when you were a young man, and what motivated you to join the Marines.
So all through high school, there was no intention for me to do anything in the military. My mother was anti-military, as any anti-military person could be. My mom was like leading the charge of that. But it was a true draw to me because of the college benefits, because of the skills that I would have learned there. I'm from Alaska. I graduated out of Bartlett High School in Anchorage, Alaska. You either did two things once you graduated. You either worked on the slope or you worked on the cruise lines. And so my thought was to join the military. I've always liked the challenge. I did a lot of research my senior year in high school to see the billets and the jobs that were available through all the different branches. Anchorage, Alaska is very big with Army and Air Force, so I had a lot of friends who were Army and Air Force. I didn't know anybody who was a Marine. I didn't even know anything about Marines other than what was in the movies. And the challenge was what drew me to it. I didn't get a door knock from the recruiter. I actually went to the recruiting office myself. I asked them to be infantry. I wanted a 5-year contract because in my mind, that 5-year contract would allow me to do any of the specialty MOSs and schoolhouses and pay back that school time and actually serve 4 years, which my goal was to be overseas the entire time. So I kind of went in there with an ultimatum to the recruiter saying, I want 5 years, I want overseas, and I'll be willing to do any job I'm qualified for. At the time, I had very high ASVAB scores. I had very high GPA in high school. The only thing I didn't have was money to go to college. Scholarships would have got me through my freshman year in college, but after that, there was no way for me to afford going to college because of the funding that I would give my family. I helped pay rent and do things like that. So the recruiter talked me out of a 5-year career choice from my contract, saying that it'd be better if I just did 4 years because that allowed more doors to be open at the end of the 4 years. He guaranteed me overseas assignment. I was really excited about that. And then after I presented him my ASVAB scores and I took the little test inside the office, I was qualified for a lot of different things. As a kid, there was a Veterans Day at one of the schools I was at, and the Marine, so each teacher, or there was different teachers who stood up and talked about the Marine Corps or their service as a veteran. The Marine simply stood up and said, it was the hardest thing I've done. It was the most rewarding thing I've done. While I was doing it, I was challenged every day, and I didn't like it. But now, I truly value what I went through to accomplish the thing. So that kind of stuck in the back of my head. And I didn't know, again, I had friends who, whose family was career Air Force, career Army, enlisted and officers. The girl I went to prom with, her dad was a colonel in the Air Force. And so I was able to talk with them. None of them had that same passion. To them, it was a job. And although I wasn't, looking for a complete lifestyle change, I also wasn't looking for a job. Because if I wanted a job, I could have stayed in Anchorage and worked on the northern slope. So that's what drew me specifically to the Marine Corps. When I told the recruiter that, and he offered up different jobs, I was like, well, then if that's the case, what's the hardest thing you've got? And he was like, well, the hardest thing we got is the infantry. And I was like, well, sign me up. So I did. I signed up for, I forget the code. It was like Yankee 3 or some crazy thing with guaranteed overseas assignment. And I was really excited about that.
Do you think the Marine Corps has maintained or instilled that same level of passion since your time?
I think because of how we've changed as a society, the way that average American is right now, we are a lot more knowledgeable. We have a lot more access to information, whether it's true information or not. It's just information. That has changed everything that we talk about. Specifically in the Marine Corps, the amount of information that's available to that young enlisted right now was not the same amount of information that was allowed or available to that senior officer back in 1993 to 1998. I'll just use that as a first kick because that was really my first tour. And you didn't have it. You had what was in front of you. It's the example of right now you are holding a copy of, your local newspaper. That's your information. That's what was available at that level to the average senior officer in Charlie Company 1-3, Kaneohe Bay Marine Corps Base, Hawaii at the time. They had just that snapshot of the pie.
Okay.
Emails wasn't that big of a deal. There was a lot of limited information. So you relied on that chain and that flow of leadership and information from the highest level down. So if you weren't really in it, you were just localized. But now we're a keystroke away from global knowledge. Now that same young enlisted sitting on fire watch in Kaneohe Bay right now, he can see what's going on within the Marine Corps aspects in CENTCOM, in SOUTHCOM. He can see those future assignment locations of, Europe, of anywhere in the South Pacific, and he can get a feel. She can see what is going on down there, what's impacting the lives or the missions in that. And I think that's really the change. So as much as I'd say, yes, it has changed, it has. It's changed because of the level of information. And when you have that information and it's all available to you as a leader, you become more cost and fear adverse. You see all of the different things that could happen because that's what's out there in the information spectrum. And so you're more adverse to that risk decision. To where, 1994, they were like, just take the squad out on the range, shoot 300 rounds. We had a staff sergeant, we had a chief warrant officer, and a platoon of Marines that was just having a day being familiar with their weapons. It wasn't a fun shoot. Don't take it as that, as like we just went out there and wasted rounds. We just hiked out to the range and we did that. Now, you can do that today. I remember distinctly doing that multiple times when I was with 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. I had a phenomenal weapons guy, Sergeant York, and he could shoot anything and teach anybody to shoot anything. So we would do range days. But it wasn't the same because, you had the level of cost analysis, you had the level of risk analysis, you had all that stuff that went into it, had to be cleared at the highest level. To where I remember the chief warrant officer literally walked out and he was like, hey, see that tree line? We're going to cut some of those trees down. So I need you guys to use those 5.56 chainsaws and start shooting those tree branches and start shooting those tree trunks. And, that to me was the difference.
Okay.
So
when you entered basic training, I haven't had the privilege of being in the military, but when you went in, it's my understanding the refrain for the Marines is every Marine's a rifleman. So there's one basic tenet of training. But when you went through your initial training, was decision-making, leadership already taught at that level, or did that come later?
No, I think from the moment you step on those yellow footprints, right? The famous yellow footprints for all the Marines, whether you go to San Diego or whether you go to Pendleton, whether you whether you go to San Diego or you go to Paris Island.
Yeah.
The idea there is that you're being told who to listen to. You're being told who's in charge. And there's a scale of that. You have a senior drill instructor. You have a junior drill instructor. You get assigned to be in squads. You get assigned to be team leaders. There's a scribe. There's people that are automatically assigned in these roles. And for that, getting off the bus in San Diego and stepping on the yellow footprints and seeing the drill instructors just rush you, I still can pick out who was the one that was in charge, who was the one that was given the assignments, all the way down, because it's thrust upon you in leadership. And even through the process, when you have other recruits at the time directing you to get your uniforms, directing you, to stand in line to get your haircut, to do all that stuff, there's people that are trying to instill in you the instant obedience to orders to somebody that is in a leadership role. And I think that's one of the greatest things. That's a Marine ethos that we all need to hold true to, is that instant obedience to orders. And I use the word ethos generically, and I know there's different terms of that out there and what it means. But for me, that's the core of what kept me in for 30 years.
And do you find that training, that ethos is the same today, or it's changed?
It's still instilled into our training pipeline. We still have that experience that we go to. The challenge with that is now I think, again, the information is out there. The idea of instant obedience to orders has a direct correlation with the punishment or the adverse action of not listening instantly. And so you don't know that, a drill instructor can't throw you off the third floor of the barracks. Not that was the threat, but,
yes.
That was the stories going in. Like, oh, I can't believe you joined the Marine Corps. Hey, their drill instructors throw people off the balconies, from my friends that had Army family.
Yes.
Like that's not the case. But you didn't know that. You just knew that you had a very intense individual who was determined to teach you. And no matter what you wanted, you knew you were going to get taught. And so that knowledge of the limitations, that knowledge of what can really happen, takes a certain percentage of our population, and it causes them just not to be afraid of it. That adverse swing of the pendulum, they don't pay attention to it. They see it as smoke and mirrors, but that's what they're fixated on, and so they don't learn. They don't, what I would say, transition. Because the whole purpose of the Marine Corps, my opinion, basic entry training from the moment that you get onto the yellow footprints until you get to your first unit. That whole pipeline. For some, that's over 18 months. Some it could be up to 2 years, depending on what they're doing, before they get to their initial unit, their permanent duty station. That whole process is to indoctrinate you into the Marine Corps lifestyle, not a job, not getting you through basic understanding of your practices, but to truly get you into a Marine Corps mentality where that lifestyle now has changed, which is a benefit to being in the Marine Corps. And for me, I could take anybody from any background, from any walk of life, any economic level, put them on the yellow footprints with the tried and true training that we have through the Marine Corps boot camp process, breaking them down to be equals. Not no matter what you had back in your mind, bigotry, racism, lack of knowledge of other lifestyles, didn't matter, because now you had a bunkmate. Now you had somebody there that was equally with you, and then you built from that, and that was the true core of what the transition meant. It didn't matter where you were, who you came from, what was going on. When you finished your entry-level training, you were a Marine. That's it. Like, you don't have to finish that. I wasn't a African-American Marine. I wasn't a white Marine. I was a Marine. Male, female, Marine. And that, I don't think, has changed. I think the challenge with it is that, again, you have the outside influences. So those outside influences, which is education, some percentage, let's say the majority of the percentage, that's helpful for it. It allows them to anticipate it. It knows the limits. But there's that smaller percentage that will use that against the system. That is where I see the change. Change is not in how our drill instructors are, not how the commandant and the sergeant major of the Marine Corps, not how the master gunnery sergeants who are controlling these pipeline processes. They're still focused on the same thing that Chesty Puller was doing. But it's the user now that is seeing the little areas that they can, not maybe put all the effort that they want to do in. And I'm not going to say circumvent the system, because it's really hard to circumvent the system, but lazy enough to get by.
Understood. Speaking of backgrounds, among your group, describe some of your peers in that initial class.
We had an individual, and he sticks out just because his name was like 27 letters, and it's not the correct thing, but in my mind it's like Zan, Banana, Perry, Agua, and he barely spoke English. I don't know what nationality he was, but he was there because that's his life dream, was to be a Marine. He encountered a Marine. I want to say he was from Central America or South America, but he encountered a Marine that was on a Unitas, and that was what drove him to be a Marine. So it didn't matter. It didn't matter the challenge. He was the guy who didn't get any sleep because he was trying to learn not only just the additional language skills, but he was trying to learn the process of doing what he was. And I believe he did phenomenal after he got out. His MOS was more of a technical MOS, mechanic side of the house, I believe. So to where I stayed on the West Coast to do infantry training, he ended up going, I believe he went to North Carolina to learn how to be a mechanic at Camp Johnson. I just knew he went to the other coast at the time. But so again, there was other examples. There was an individual there who, as far back as the first day of the Marine Corps, somebody in his family had served from a very established family in Virginia, and every person and all sides of his family had served in the Marine Corps. So he was our go-to guy who knew all the stuff, the little tricks of the trade, what it meant to be phase 2. Why do we have to roll our sleeves like this? Because all other branches at the time rolled them like that. He was the guy that we talked to on that. And to the question, the rest of them, all of us understood as soon as we were formed into our platoon that there was a hierarchy. But the benefit with our training is that everybody gets fired. Right? And it could be for the craziest thing, but when you have a collection of people that are from all walks of life, and you got to go stand in formation for 5 minutes to go do something without moving, and somebody moves, well, that's the leader's fault. They're fired. And so over the course of time, everybody got fired. Everybody got in that. And so the joke in a lot of the old school, jokes was like, oh, I was a guide in boot camp. Yeah, everybody was a guide in boot camp. Oh, I was a squad leader in boot camp. Everybody was a squad leader in boot camp. And what it did is it put you into a leadership position to make you do those uncomfortable things. Tell everybody to get out of the head. Tell everybody to get up. Tell everybody how to shave, to do these billets. And so as we cycled around, it was interesting to see, I bring up Z. He was a phenomenal leader because it was as if everybody was learning with him. The individual that had the history of Marine Corps service in his family, he was not, because it wasn't about, I would say it wasn't at the level of every person in the squad. He already knew everything, so you couldn't tell him anything. So it didn't matter the balance of the day. It only mattered that, my brother, who's a corporal serving on the air station, in Iwakuni, he knows this. I'm like, yeah, but we're talking about the grinder, and preparing us to go to, shoot week. That's what we're talking about. So I don't know if exactly that answers the question, but I think in that melting pot of people, those two stick out the most just because of the different ends of the spectrum, and there was countless individuals in the middle. Unfortunately, none of us really got assigned together. So as soon as graduation hit, I can't remember anybody that was in my same boot camp platoon that went over to the advanced infantry schools with me. I can't remember them. And I don't think there was a lot that were on the buddy program back then, which is different now. So now, if you and I are 18 years old and we're like, hey, let's join the Marine Corps, we could sign in for a buddy program, and at least through the entry-level pipelines, we could stay together. Gives a little bit more of a bonding thing, but, you know.
If it could be said, what did you find to be, perhaps this is only in hindsight now, but one of the most rewarding aspects of that initial training?
I think for me, it's different. One, I didn't have a father figure in my life, so it was always me. I took care of my little brothers. I took care of a lot of things around the house. So when somebody, we'll call it the drill instructor, stepped in and was literally teaching me how to shave, was yelling at me because I wasn't running fast enough. Now keep in mind, I was a jackrabbit. I used to run really, really fast. I was a really good runner, cross country, sprints, hurdles. That was my thing. My stress reliever as a kid was to go running. And in Alaska, if you're going to go run to your neighbor's house, for me, it was running 3 or 4 miles. So that's what I did. So I get to the Marine Corps and they're like, you got to do 3 miles. Like, this is nothing. But to push you to go faster, to push you to do those things, to get you outside of your comfort zone, and then to pat you on the back when you do it right, that was a rarity. So those moments where not only was I held accountable for the mistakes, which I was used to, which the average person is used to. The average person, you can yell at them and they'll just, they've been yelled at before. You can do all the negative side of the house for the failures. But it's interesting to see, and even today, how many people will respond to the positive side of the house. And that's what sticks out. The drill instructors, as scary as our green belt was, I don't remember his name, but I see his face in my dreams. He was just so angry all the time. But when we passed and won a little drill thing, that him coming through and just looking at everybody and saying, hey, you did a good job. Life-changing. Memorable. I'm saying
yes.
That, yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
Let's shoot forward, going from the very start now to the very end. Tell us about your last billet, your last assignment.
So I was selected through a board process to go and serve as the Sergeant Major for the Inspector General of the Marine Corps. Not many people want to do that job, to be fair. It requires you to travel a lot. It required a personal skill of being able to look at somebody who's not doing good and telling them that they're not doing good. People who are not used to being told that, because you're inspecting generals, you're inspecting higher commands. The Marine Corps does the Inspector General process different than all other branches. Instead of waiting for an issue to happen, they have an inspection program where they look at what's scheduled for that year, and they look at the units that have had different levels of inspection but haven't reached an IG inspection, and then they schedule those. So you could predict when you're going to be inspected by Headquarters Marine Corps, by the Inspector General of the Marine Corps, just because you haven't been inspected in 3 years. But it's not because you've done something wrong. It's simply because of your time. To where others, in my billet as the Sergeant Major, I tried to get as involved with the other branches' IGs as I could, right? And so, the Sergeant Major, the Command Sergeant Major for the Army IG was really good at, when he was in town, sending an email out, hey, let's link up. So we'd usually link up at the Navy Yard, which was nice because we tried to do it quarterly, but really it didn't turn out quarterly. It turned out almost semi-annually to get all of us together at once. And it was always interesting to hear how they approached their billet, because their billet was reactive. Something was to happen, a report would come down, then they would use the resources and they'd go. To where ours was proactive. So when I told them that I just, showed up at a unit to walk across to see the barracks, to do a deep dive in this, their first thought was, well, what was wrong with the barracks? Well, what was wrong with the finances? Well, nothing. We just wanted to check the pulse. And I'm being very simple in the explanation of it, because I really didn't know the details of what they did on a daily basis. I just knew that the way I did business was different than the way that all the rest of them did business. So I loved the billet. I absolutely loved it. Like, I think my favorite rank by far was sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. A sergeant, you're in charge, but you're young enough to forget. so you can have all the fun in the world. You could take the squad out, you could take the platoon out, you could do things like that. So in, happy memories of shaping somebody, seeing them accomplish something, patting them on the back, Sergeant by far was the best. But overall, when it comes to the visibility, when it came to the accomplishment stuff, my time at the Inspector General's office was the best. I literally would fly out to a unit. There would be a read ahead. I would get on the ground. I would not announce myself to everybody, because once I did that once, and they like staged things. It's not the point of me coming out. But I was able to go through. I was able to talk to the Marines. It was one thing that the Master Gunnery Sergeant, who I worked with over there, me and him were as thick as thieves, peas and carrots, peanut butter and jelly. And I'd ask him, hey, because he'd been on the team longer, like, do you have history with this area? And, to his credit, he always had some weird type of knowledge. Like, yeah, the chow hole over here is always running out of, clean utensils. So the Marines are complaining about having to use plastic stuff. Or the barracks over here is always out of hot water. Or, there was always something that he had historical data about. So we'd just go. Just start walking. And it was... Let me tell you this really quick story about Master Gunnery Sergeant Jason Surratt, my battle buddy as the IG. We're walking in California. We're going to a meeting with another senior enlisted. Not on the Sergeant Major side of the house, but on the Master Gunnery Sergeant side of the house. So an E9 that he had known that had some questions on a policy and a procedure that Jason wanted to go and address him directly. This is the highest level of knowledge. We're going to go give it to him straight from the mouth of the babe. And this young Marine was just like walking on by, not looking happy. And I always try to beat the people to the greeting. So I'm like, hey, good morning, Marine, how are you? And of course, like, oh, living the dream. and Jason was like, what's going on? And the Marine made a comment about something in his room. And Jason's like, I don't believe you. That's not true. And the Marine was like, no, it's true, Master Guns. Now, to a young Marine, a Master Gunnery Sergeant and a Sergeant Major are pretty intimidating. So they don't want to talk to us. They usually want to avoid us at all cost. But we had a good personality. I think Jason and I worked really well together. And the Marine was brave and was like, no, I'll show you. So we ended up walking to this Marines barracks in California. It had to do with something not important, but what is important is that we went through that Marines room and there was an issue. Absolutely there was an issue. But it wasn't a big issue, but it was an issue that had been reported time and time again, because the young Marine, this young Lance Corporal, had history of how many times he reported it to the barracks NCO and this and that. So just Jason and I go down, Master Guns and I go down, we ask the barracks NCO, what do you do when somebody reports this? And he's like, well, I report it to the barracks manager. He's like, well, where's the barracks manager? Like, well, he's probably in his room. Oh, could you go get him? I would say within like 20 minutes, we had the entirety of a chain of command down there, curious on what we were doing, conducting an inspection. And we weren't doing an inspection. We were just looking at an issue, identifying it.
You were pulling a thread.
Yeah. The Marines, I remember, all the young Marines that were there were happy that we were there. The Sergeant Major, the leadership, they were not happy that we were there. And you just got that feeling like we had overstepped our bounds. But as I was reporting to my authorities, to my boss, we knew, everybody knew I was in the area. Everybody knew that's what we did. We didn't violate anything. And, for 2+ years, that was what I tried really hard to do. I wasn't trying to be sneaky. There was no, hey, I gotcha moments. I never not told people that I was going to places. But if I was at a chow hall, or if I was walking next to a smoke pit, if I was running PT with the Marines, and they said, hey, this is an issue, let me see it. Let's go. Which every good leader in the Marine Corps does. Please, I want the listeners to know that a good leader doesn't look at the Marines and say, oh, well, they're not in my platoon, I'm not going to go there. A good leader goes. A good leader passes somebody in the exchange and says, "What's going on? Oh, I got an issue with this. Well, let me help you out," regardless of what unit that person is in. And I think that's what kept me going in the Marine Corps, is that every person I came into contact with had that belief. There's only the few smaller percentages that were like, "Oh, it's not my Marine," or that's not your area. Those guys are the ones that are in it for the wrong reasons.
The in-between from your moment stepping on those yellow footprints that you had mentioned and to your last assignment. So you've had a diverse career in the Marine Corps. You've been a Marine Security Guard watchstander. You've been a Marine Security Guard detachment commander. You've done multiple combat tours, both Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Mm-hmm. So that in-between part, what contributed, what did the Marine Corps give you that contributed to your ability to make sound decisions, to lead appropriately?
The examples and the actions if I didn't make a good decision, right? Again, and it's not fire and brimstone, but if you don't have a right count of personnel, you risk losing somebody. If you don't have a clear plan of attack, you risk losing somebody. And so that...
Just to be clear, losing somebody, you mean loss of life?
Yes,
Okay.
Loss of life or loss, right? So there's different examples that I could fill an entire podcast about, famous examples of where lack of accountability resulted in a Marine being left, right? You never leave a Marine, no one's ever left behind, but there's examples in training environments or in admin environments where Marines were left. You know, there's a big case study your listeners could listen and Google it up about 29 Palms. And I'm not going to go into it, but the idea is that you never want to be that person. And if you do get identified as being that person, you're like, as a young Lance Corporal, I remember going through a fire team leader board. So I had all of my squad leaders, those squad leaders in the platoon at the time, there was 3 squad leaders and a guide that put me through a day with 2 other individuals, so there was 3 of us, of evaluation. Yeah, it was all in-house. The lieutenant knew nothing about it. The staff sergeant kind of knew about it. But 3 squad leaders and a guide tested us if we were going to be good fire team leaders. And it had to do with our previous actions. I was standing at parade rest while one of the squad leaders was talking about my actions on a range in Okinawa and how I did this and how I did that. And because it was good, it was identified as being good. If it was bad, it was identified as being bad. You know, and that stuck with me so that when I did become a fire team leader, I held my Marines accountable the same way. When I became a squad leader, I pushed to have fire team leader boards, and we did it. When I was a guide, when I went out on MSG duty as a watchstander, you have immediate repercussions if you mess up out there. And it was hey, you screw up, you go home. There's no room for error in certain billets that I was in, you know. But in the same time, the leadership, the first major transition was as a infantryman in Charlie Company 1-3, Kaneohe Bay at the time, Air Station, Hawaii. You would get lifed out, which, you know, get yelled at, you get screamed at. You would have, you know, all the different punishments that you can imagine was there. And it would happen wherever you were. Didn't matter if I was at the exchange. Didn't matter if I was walking, you know, to church in church clothes. If I was doing something wrong, somebody called me out on it. Well, now you take that same person who grew up in that style of leadership in the Marine Corps and you put them in a suit and tie, surrounded by Department of State employees, career state employees who know that you're only there for a short period of time, and try to convince them that their access to the emergency door to have a cigarette causes multiple alarms to trip. You can't scream at them. You can't go down there and life them out. You can't take them over to the tree line. You can't shake them about, you know, wall-to-wall counseling. There's none of that. You got to explain to them in a very professional manner. And it was the RSO that I had in my first duty station in Djibouti, before Camp Lemonnier. She had a plaque Diplomacy. And there's a lot of other RSOs who have this plaque, but that's the first time that I really saw it. Diplomacy, the ability to tell someone to go to hell and have them look forward to the trip. And of course, the phrase is being belt fed. I was a belt fed infantryman. My first duty station, Djibouti. I was the only infantryman in my entire detachment. We had every other shape and size within the staff NCO and the 5 watchstanders. I was the only infantryman, so I was high strung. I was high stress. But to me, I was normal, and they were lazy and lackadaisical, right? And so, we molded together. We shared, and it wasn't a bad process, but it was a process like every single new environment. If you go into a new environment thinking that you're going to shape that environment, you're the outlier. You're wrong in that. No matter what job you do, no matter what lifestyle you're choosing to go into, because I say the Marine Corps is a lifestyle. It's absolutely a lifestyle. And it takes time to adjust. If you go in there bullheaded thinking that I can just be who I am and I don't have to change, not at all. You can keep your same core values. Marine Corps core values have not changed since 1775. But our communication has changed. And so a good leader, a good person in any industry, the first thing they learn when they go into a billet, when they go into a spot, is the communication key. What is it to communicate here? Every environment has a different way of communicating. Charlie Company 1-3, with my squad leader, it was on your toes, pointing at your chest, screaming and hollering. Tour as a Marine security guard, serving in Djibouti, serving in Moscow, Russia, serving in Berlin, and finishing it up in Albania, opening up that embassy. It was not screaming and screaming, because some of those embassies were high threat posts. So if you showed an emotional outburst, if you showed an inability to control yourself in a way that lacked clear communication for an audience to understand, you no longer had that job. So learning how it was to communicate. And to be clear, expressing the importance of not opening the emergency fire door to the secretary in Djibouti was absolutely different than expressing the emergency fire door to the motor pool in Moscow, Russia. Same problem, different people, total different communication was required. And had I not adapted to the environment, I don't think I would have been successful.
With that in mind, what would you identify as traits that you observed over your time that for you reflected good decision making, good leadership, whether they were coming from someone above you in rank or equal in rank, a subordinate, or even if it was outside the military from your times working with other government partners?
So in the Marine Corps, we have the 14 leadership traits that's beaten to our heads. And it's from day one. Most commands have them painted on the steps. You get the, JJ did tie buckles, and that's what you do. That's your answer on the boards, and that's what you look at when you talk about evaluation of leaders. And, the questions are always like, what's the most valuable trait that we have? And I will go off book,
yes,
right? And I'll say, what I gained by the diverse upbringing I had in the Marine Corps is that integrity. You have to have integrity. A leader who goes in and knows what they know, and he or she admits that they don't know everything, and it doesn't have to be a subservient. You're not releasing or relinquishing your power, saying, well, I don't know what's going on here. But someone who is truly, centered on integrity within what they do, those are the people that you march through the gates of hell with. Those are the people who taught me the most, because it wasn't an ego trip in the idea of balancing one thing or the other. It was me knowing that if I caught them not being correct, I could tell them, and their integrity would say, well, you know what, Scotty's right. I did that wrong. So I'll correct it. Not, who the heck are you? You can't tell me you're right or wrong. What do you know? This, that, and the other thing because of your subordinate and I'm the superior. Or the other adverse effects that go with that. And of course, there's a time and place to have those conversations. And I believe that every leader that I've encountered would appreciate you telling them at the right time and at the right moment. When it's not the right time, when it's not the right moment, and you have to make that judgment call. If you didn't establish yourself as being an honest individual, if you didn't show your Marines that integrity was key to your decision-making process, they will hesitate in the execution of that order because they will wonder why you're making it. And you see it echo in combat. You get into a sniper fire, right? So you're on patrol, you're in Afghanistan, you're at the Southern Cross, and all of a sudden someone starts shooting at you. And then that somebody who starts shooting at you stops shooting at you, and it's no longer fully automatic fire. It's no longer grazing fire. It's a single pop shot with, the poppy seeds popping around your head. You telling that squad, hey, I need you to get up and move this way. I need you to get out of cover and do this. If they don't think you have integrity, they're going to hesitate.
Let's go slightly on a tangent here. So I brought this up the other day in another interview. During part of my career with diplomatic security, we did post-security program reviews, right? And working with a colleague, also a former Marine, there was one particular post, and he had shared that with this particular regional security officer, he was a little lacking in the interpersonal skills. And when my colleague had engaged with him and had asked, are you participating in some of the social events? Like, are you going to the softball games that Post organizes? And this particular regional security officer said that's not my job. My job is to run the security shop, right? And my colleague said, well, let me ask you this then. If you're not out there on the field, so to say, playing with others, and they don't see you out there, how do you expect them to listen to you in a moment of crisis? So with that in mind, and going back to, what you were sharing with us before about integrity, but also honesty and approachability, I think all of that lends itself to engendering the trust. What are your comments or thoughts about that? That, there's the one side about, yes, exercising the responsibilities of the position, but there's also the side of being able to connect with people.
And that's what I would center on, Maurice. When you said that, my heart was like, oh, what a douchebag, right? Like, it's not his job. And I'm not going to say to the point of, hey, if he doesn't go out and play softball, the people aren't going to respond to him. That's not where I would go with that. Where I would go is that he's not going to know how to communicate with them.
Yes.
If all I see is you in this environment, and that moment of chaos is any environment.
Yes.
It's not a controlled space. It's not a friendly environment, right? It's chaos. And so I would want to go out and see my fellow people and my subordinates in a softball environment. I'd want to see them in a chaotic environment. I would try to get them up or down heart rates just to know how I'd have to communicate. Because when I'm in the zone, like I mentioned running before, when I'm in the zone running, I ran a marathon at one point in time, and where the finish line was up a hill, and there was this individual who was doing nothing but trying to be helpful, but all I heard was negativity. Because at that moment, where my body and my mind was focused on getting to the next 500 yards, I didn't want to hear how there's bananas and there's this. she was trying to do something very nice, but in the end, all I could think about was just pushing her off the bike. Like I didn't want to hear it. So I think she learned from that. And then, towards the absolute end, she wasn't encouraging me with different things at the finish line. She was talking about my stride. She got into my head in the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
That was helpful, right? So I think about that when I think about how I want to communicate and influence those people around me. And your drive to be connected with the people to which you would hope to lead. Because you could be in a leadership role and not leading.
Yes.
The joke of the Marine Corps, that senior lance corporal, not a leadership billet, but you want stuff done in the motor pool, you talk to the senior lance corporal, right? Because that individual, he or she knows how to tell everybody what they need to hear to get it done. Vice just coming in, snapping the fingers, pointing the fingers and saying this, that, which has a time and place, which I totally agree with. But sometimes you also need that connection, communication, and just trust of the subordinates and your coworkers to say, okay, well, this is why he's saying it that way. This is why she wants us to do this. So let's get it done. Okay.
During your time, obviously in the Marine Corps, did you pick up or identify recurring themes that always led to mistakes, poor judgment, bad decision making, bad leadership? And it's like, I see this over and over again.
I think for me, there was not a singular characteristic that identified the bad leadership decisions. And maybe I was just lucky. And I was very lucky in the people to whom I got to have as mentors. Individuals out there that just are world renowned within the Marine Corps of being oracles and the Sherpas to get us up to Everest. And they took me under their wings, and I was able to do that. So within that, it was identifying that young leader early and the bad habits. And sometimes people would categorize the bad habits as being, all the same style, being, they're too eager, or they're just not listening. But I don't think that there was one trait that stood out amongst the people who, historically were known to make bad decisions, other than having bad advisors. The one theme that I could pick out, even in my last tour at the Office of the Inspector General in the Marine Corps, you want to see a bad general? I can point out 3 bad staff NCOs, those advisors, that general had at a younger age. You want to see a bad staff NCO who is just a horrible senior staff NCO? I could point out a lieutenant that just didn't guide them, didn't support them. And I think that was the trend. Your advisors are the people who, you may not be happy that they're telling you that your breast stinks, but you look forward to them to telling you that your breast stinks. That it's not a good idea. The devil advocate that will go in there and purposefully start the argument behind closed doors. This is good, this is bad. That command team that sits in the room and just twiddles their thumbs trying to think of ways to argue with the boss so that the boss hears point counterpoint. The people who didn't have that, who didn't have that free communication, behind the closed doors in the appropriate time and space, those are the ones who made the bad decisions, who made those mistakes. But the Marine Corps is different in the idea that I would say 90% of my career, that zero choice came from Scotty. If somebody was telling me to do something, and I did it. And if it was a bad decision, we made that bad decision a good one. If I was directed to do something and it wasn't the right way to do it, collectively we educated the person and said this is the right way to do it. And you can think of admin, you can think of training, you can think of operations. I was at a schoolhouse for 2 different commands. One as a first sergeant, one as a sergeant major, and curriculum, student development, instructor skills, master trainer syllabus, all those things. The boss can come in and say, hey, I want to do it this way. And you're like, yes, we will get the goal done, but we're not going to drive down the street the same way that you're driving down the street, and here's why. And I can't think of one commander that I served with that was just so adverse to counsel. I can't. They all were willingly open to it. Now, we could get a bunch of other senior Marines in here, and they could probably tell you different sides of the story, but for me, I was lucky in that.
Your assistant Chloe here wants to make her presence known.
Yeah, a little stinky dog.
What would you say are some perhaps of the deficiencies of the Marine Corps, of the military in general?
Yeah, so in comparison, the deficiencies is recognition on the idea of what it means to have done a good job. I say that one of the number one deficient, in my opinion, the reason why we lose so many Marines every year who don't choose to re-enlist, who don't choose to, continue with their commission, it's because they don't feel a worth. They're not being recognized. And it's not an award. It's not a Navy Achievement Medal hanging on their chest. It is sometimes it's as simple. And I had a commander who absolutely proved this. Phenomenal man. First day of school, I'll never forget. First day of school in that area, everybody with a kid, they had to get their kid to school because we were in a schoolhouse. We're in an environment that, it wasn't chaos. It wasn't this. I mean, chaos with the students, but he allowed everybody with a kid to take their kid to school on the first day of school. That sent a ripple. Like when he first announced that, I was like, sir, you're crazy. What are you going to get from this? But it was because he saw us taking all the time. Because you take time away from family when you're serving in the Marine Corps. Commanders, sergeant, senior enlisted, they know that. He was trying to give it back. And he would give it back in other ways. And so it was that recognition. It doesn't have to be a medal. It doesn't have to be monetary. Sometimes it's just bringing somebody out in formation and saying, look at this guy. Look what this person did. Look what she's doing. Give her one. How you recognize somebody is truly based on that individual, right? So you can't know that if you don't go play softball with them, right? I can pat you on the back and that is not good enough for you. I could say you did a good job and I'm so proud to be serving with you, and you're like, lip service, the guy's just painting the fence, as the saying goes. But if I happen to make a home-cooked meal and share it with you, all of a sudden to you, now I've made it, we broke bread. And these are just random examples
Yes.
I've thrown out there. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't play softball with you, if I didn't communicate with you, if I didn't try to be genuine in my communication with you. Communication's a two-way street. I got to know what pushes your buttons, good and bad. You got to know what pushes mine, good and bad.
Input and output.
Yep.
Here's a question that I had thought of specifically for us. Do you think some members or particular groups within the military itself should be held to an even higher standard than their peers?
Absolutely. I firmly believe that. So,
which would those be?
If you have the authority as a commander, if you can sign a piece of paper to incarcerate somebody, if you can sign a piece of paper to dismiss somebody out of the Marine Corps, you could sign that administrative separation, you could sign that confinement order, you have to be held to a higher standard. You have to. Because that order, that process has to be equal across all levels, right? You can't have an isms in there. And so when it comes to sexual assault, when it comes to the individuals that are looking at those cases, when it comes to those board members, and then all of a sudden they're found to have done something that is illegal, immoral, and unethical, that throws it into a tailspin. And so when I talk to the young commanders, like I was lucky enough to be able to address young commanders, newly promoted lieutenants, all the different things that I've done in my career, and I count, my time addressing those groups as being the most valuable, and letting them know that they are expected to sit on these boards. And I'm talking, it's a different process, and I'm sorry we went off on a tangent here, but when you have an accusation of a sexual assault, it goes into a different process. It's not as simple as a DUI. It's not. There's different boards that happen, and you have these individuals that sit on these boards, and they evaluate the events that take place. I need them to be completely, I'm going to say, free of doubt that their judgment is the correct judgment. And if at any point in time their judgment is identified to be flawed by the system, not by the individual,
yes,
then they absolutely need to be removed. I firmly believe that. And it's a controversial thought, right? The young Marine, the young service members right now, if they are listening to this, they're like, he's full of garbage because the Sergeant Major gets this and then nothing happens to him, but the Lance Corporal gets this and they get an NJP and loss of rank. Punitive punishment, however it is determined, there's a balance in that within the hierarchy of things. So yes, I will take a Lance Corporal. I have unfortunately witnessed non-judicial punishments where the individual loses rank. Right? It's never a good thing. Even if it's warranted, I would say it's never a good thing. But it's the right thing. Because you know what? That young Lance Corporal who's now a PFC, that sergeant who's now a corporal, they have an opportunity to learn from that, show from that. And they'll say, there's a zero defect mentality because we have high year ranks right now. You can only stay in the Marine Corps so long at this rank, to where, decades ago they'll tell you, I had a sergeant who was in for like 20 years, or, the veterans way back in the day. But the idea here is that they still have time to recoup, because a general can look at their performance post-punishment and give them a waiver to stay in. But they have to be worth it. Now that Sergeant Major who doesn't get NJP'd, he definitely doesn't not retire. That individual, that officer that did the bad thing, they don't get to stick around for another few years. That has an impact, because now they have to tell people why I got out. Now they say you don't have to, but you have a DD-214. I'm looking at somebody's DD-214 and I see 18 years and 6 months. My first question is, what did you do? You made it to the rank of gunnery sergeant. You made it to the rank of major, and you're getting out. What happened? And I don't think there's a corporation in America that doesn't ask that question. I don't think there's a business on the planet that doesn't look at somebody who is close enough to that retirement phase, different retirement system now, but who's at that time mark. It's just like, why didn't you stick around to get retirement? So
you had mentioned sexual assault. Let's touch briefly upon that, because women are now serving in more and more roles in the military, in the Marine Corps. And there may be listeners out there who they are going to have, sisters or daughters entering the military. From your experiences, what has the military done? Has it done enough? Is it doing it the right way? Again, there are so many nuances to this, but the military's approach to addressing sexual assault. And when we look back, I went through some of the reports, and it seems like on average, the Department of Defense receives about approximately 5,000 reports of sexual assault harassment on an annual basis.
So I would say that my first 4 years, I never saw a female Marine, right? And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just giving context-wise.
Yes.
We didn't. In boot camp, they weren't being trained in San Diego. They were being trained all in Parris Island, so we didn't have to worry about that. But counterparts, when I got to the fleet who were in Parris Island, were like, we were told not to look at them. They were a different being. So there was always a barrier there. So it was initially ingrained in us that it's a different line, that they are different, and you have to treat them as different. Now I get to MSG duty, where we have female Marine watchstanders, And I had, in Moscow as my second post, we had, I want to say at max, at one point in time, we had 7 females in the detachment. They were no different than the males other than their genetic makeup, right?
Yeah.
But it was harder to see, because you have annual training classes. You have physical fitness that you got to do. Now I can get down and I can perform different exercises, and it's not weird, right? And I'm not gonna say like wrestling, but you can do close quarter combat, male to male, and you get in all these different things and hand-to-hand combat techniques. But then you get a female there, and all of a sudden, the things from my first 4 years flash in my head, like, oh, I can't even touch you. And the next thing you know, her name was Blair, beats the crap out of me because she was just a very, she had just a phenomenal individual, and she knew the techniques and she knew how to do it, and she beat me up. And after a while, it was sparring partners, and it didn't matter male or female. But talking with the friends that I had from that detachment, talking with the female friends, it was harder because what is too much, right? When is it comfortable to tell somebody that they're uncomfortable? I think when it's the same gender, you have a little bit more of a acceptance to be honest about your feelings. But for whatever reason, when it came to, again, solely my own example, not having an opportunity to co-work with the opposite or with another gender, then all of a sudden having it right there in my face, you were very hesitant. It was hesitation, and you're like, oh, what's right, what's wrong? I don't know what to do here. And talking with them, that created its own problem, because then it wasn't as if they were being treated equal. They didn't know how to receive certain type of inputs, and then you do have the relationship, the individuals that think, oh, well, clearly we're going to have a relationship because it's just me and you here. We're doing this, we're doing that, and individuals, male and female, having that romantic relationship does deter from the readiness of the unit. It has an impact because now there's just questions of the people around. It's questions of themselves. Am I going to make that call? And when I addressed the students at Fort Leonard Wood when I was the first sergeant there, I didn't matter if I was addressing females or males, because at that time we still separated in barracks, females and males. We still separated in classes, certain things. This was all a female class. I was like, this doesn't make any sense, right? But we worked through it. So I just need you to be comfortable and honest with yourself to communicate it, because harassment and assault, there's different definitions for that.
Yes.
If you don't know those definitions, you don't know what to call it. And so education at the very entry level, I think, is key. We did not have that in 1993. Wasn't something that you got taught. We have that now. So in that respect, I think clearly defining it and explaining it to the audience as a whole, because it's, in my experience, I don't just need to tell that to 18-year-old Scott who's on the Yellow Footprints today. I also need to tell that to Sergeant Major Scott who's been in the Marine Corps for 30 years. Because those definitions mean things.
Yes.
And when it comes to our sexual assault response, there was a time frame in the Marine Corps where we swung really hard to where everything was really bad. It didn't matter. If you were accused, you were guilty. If you were guilty, the commanders didn't want you, the sergeant major, master guns didn't want you, and you were branded. And it could have been a simple mistake. And I'm not going to talk specifics because I've had to deal with specific cases, yes. But in the example of me teaching you how to drive, if you're driving a manual vehicle, I am not going to touch you on your shoulder to get your attention in a vehicle that prohibits us from communicating verbally because of the noise and because of what's going on. I'm not going to touch your shoulder because that could impact how you manipulate the steering wheel, could impact how you shift the gears. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit you on your thigh. Now, to somebody who's never been hit on their thigh before, that's immediately assault. And it's another gender. Didn't matter if I'm male and the person who touched my thigh is female. It didn't matter. In that example, without knowing the definitions, without clearly communicating what you're doing, that could be perceived as an unwanted touch. So that unwanted touch would brand that individual. And we had a phase in the Marine Corps where that was a career ender. And to say everybody was walking around afraid to make that, afraid to call that. I had very good staff. There was phenomenal Marines that I worked with as instructors, as cadres, as master trainers at that particular schoolhouse, male, female, gender regardless, sexual preferences regardless. We had a good mix of everybody who trusted that we could communicate it clearly. And so we did. And I think that's a lot better. To see what was happening at the schoolhouse in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for the Motor Transportation Instruction Company, and to remember what I went through in 1993 in San Diego. And granted, infantry training is different than the motor T training, hands down. But even defining what is right and what is wrong, we're doing it better now. So I say it is in a better swing. Whoever, if there's somebody out there listening and they're like, oh, we've got it hand down. We don't. It always needs to improve, just because communication always needs to improve. The idea of definitions need to improve. And if there's one incident, that's one incident too much. I'm not looking at a zero incident. I'm not looking at a piece of paper to say I want to have zero because that's the goal. No, I want to have zero because that's better for the people, right? Chasing a goal is what I'm saying is the wrong thing. Getting people to act right and treat each other right is the goal. Now, IG side of the house, to say people chase the goal of zero, that's a reality. There are certain individuals that you come across, they're not interested in the people effect. That's secondary to them. They're interested in the zero report effect. They're interested in the zero number. And I think that's the wrong goal. And I hope I'm explaining it right. One is looking at a stat, trying to fight a stat. One is looking at the people and trying to help the people. I want more people focused on people. The programs, the initiatives that are coming out of Quantico, that is coming down from the Commandant, these are new initiatives. Now, granted, I've been retired for a little bit, but on my way out the door, those initiatives were people-based. There was a time frame where they were number-based. The number-based approach is wrong. To tell a commander that their goal is to have zero reports, to have zero sexual assaults, yeah. But if that's all you're saying, that's the wrong way to communicate it. You want zero because then your people are better people.
Form by substance.
Yes.
Interesting. And also, the military is doing better because this is also the military adapting to changes in society, adapting to new ways of doing things in the military. So, as an outsider, it sounds to me it's a bit of growing pains, and these things take time. Mistakes are going to be made, but it also seems that the military is doing what it can. It's an evolving system, from what you're describing, to address these unfortunate incidents. Speaking of women in the military, having done a tremendous amount of time, having served in combat, speak to our listeners about the value that having women in the military brings to it.
Well, beyond just the value of the different genders, the value of different ideas. I want to have, and I got in trouble, let me say it a different way. I was talked to by a sergeant major when I was a young staff sergeant because I made the comment that I don't care about the individual's sexual preference, where they come from, religion, height, color, or creed. I care that they can do a job. And that upset that particular sergeant major at the time, because obviously he had different opinions, wrong opinions. Allowing a diverse collection of thought, allowing a diverse collection of people to build a force means that that force is going to be better. If you look at, and just to take a page from George Lucas, right? If everybody's a stormtrooper, you're not getting any diversity of thought. Now, granted, you have a great force that's going to, march into the battle and do what you tell them to do. But what if you don't tell them to do anything? When that moment of chaos hits, that the plan goes crazy, what are they going to do? Are they going to know exactly what you meant by these particular communications? Is this order and this guidelines and these, briefs? Are they going to be able to adapt to that and know what you mean? Are you going to be able to communicate it clearly? No, they'll stand still. History has proven that. And I'm not going to go into that. My theory is the better I have at diversity, and people don't like that word for whatever reason, but when I look at a unit, and if I see only one particular thing, I want to add something else.
Yes.
So that I can get a better foundation, so that we can get better, the idea of everybody has to have the same, and I'm being very, this is not a realistic example. But if we all came from the exact same background, the exact same state, the exact same time, then when we got into a challenge, we would all have ideally, we'd all only have one way to get out of it. Vice, one of my favorite commercials for the Marine Corps is not the dragon slaying one that everyone's talking about because the one Marine found the sword and that's a big deal and that's what got us in. We all want to slay a dragon. No, there was a commercial that came out about 10 years ago for the Marine Corps recruiting commercial. And what it did is it showed young individuals from all backgrounds, from all genders, from all make, and it was to a beat of a drum. So it showed, the young female in the inner city. It showed the male playing football. It showed the female in Iowa out on a cornfield. It just picked different parts of America. It picked like 8 different people, all of them greatly different. And then it showed them drilling in the Marine Corps. Like the final thing is that they all stood in line. And I'm like, that's what you want. I want to have an individual, regardless of their gender, sexual preference, I want them based on their capabilities. And if that is the standard, then we'll be good. And someone in another conversation that I had recently was like, well, when you look at how people are built, when you look at the science of the human body, a male's body can do this, a female's body can do that. And I'm like, well, sure, that's why everybody has to have that same physical standard. If we're talking physical standards.
Yes.
But in times where I have gone and done the crazy things and seen the crazy patrols, and you're going over the mountains in Afghanistan, you're marching through the deserts in Iraq, having the female lioness teams assigned to the unit, having the female motor T operators out there in the trucks, I can tell you that yes, as much as our bodies are different, it's still the will of the person. And to where one of the arguments from the person I was talking to earlier in the week is like, well, I can't put a 70-pound pack on a female and have her go the distance that I can have a male. I'm like, well, what male are we talking about? Now, yes, through the process, identifying individuals that have the capability of doing that, that's the key. To say blanket statement, well, because of the problems that we have with this particular thing, then we're gonna draw the line in the sand to say no for everybody. I don't agree with that. I think that, yes, having been in a schoolhouse, having seen the impact of heavy loads on different bodies, there is a body type where me doing a McCree, which is a forced march over a certain amount of time with a certain amount of distance, that destroys certain bodies. It's easy for someone to say, well, it's susceptible to the female body because of the way their hips. But I can also look at other, let's say, groups of body styles where it has the same impact. So am I going to outline all that? I don't think so. I think there is a capability that you have to look at.
In terms of standards, do you think the military, the Marine Corps has, even if it was at a moment in time, lowered its standards to achieve or pursue diversity?
I don't think that that the Marine Corps specifically has done it with a specific goal of doing X. I think we have think tanks throughout my time. Like, again, early 90s, you did your 20 plus miles forced march in a certain time frame. We hiked from Pacalo training area down to the shipyard because it was required. You did 4 laps around Kaneohe Bay because it was a McCree time and you're being evaluated on your ability to do that. One of my first MEUs, we hit 12 miles in the desert of Egypt just because we needed to prove to the MEU commander that we could do 12 miles in the middle of Egypt. And okay, well, when I look at the shift of where our standards are, the physical standards, how we test that, I believe in the science of it. Now, I also believe that every system has its flaws, and to where I can't think of any time in any of my combat deployments where I did more than 20 miles with 30 pounds on my back. No, I can't. But you know what I can think of? I can think of going up to the LPOPs in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan and it being like 1 mile, but it feeling like 50 miles. And I definitely had more than 30 pounds in my pack because we had to get up there for a 7-day long-range patrol. So that standard, as it has changed, we no longer do McCrees. That's the whole point with that, right?
Yes.
The idea of what I would call a McCree has changed. The evaluation for the combat readiness of an infantry unit with the United States Marine Corps is an evaluation that has changed. And it has changed because it needs to change. The standards, though, like hurting our backs because we were doing sit-ups. So we changed to crunches. Crunches does this, now we're doing planks. And the learning curve for our physical evaluations has changed, in the amount of our learning curve for electronics has changed. I'm not a physical fitness expert. But I believe that the people that advise the commandant, and when the commandant says this is what we need to do as a service, I believe that he's right. It's going to take time for that to be acceptable, but just for the audience, those people who may be listening that are Marines from the old school days, remember when we could kip? So I could get up on a pull-up bar and swing my body like a crazy person and, do a gazillion pull-ups. But am I really doing pull-ups? Because I can't kip on the side of a ship. I can't kip on the side of a pickup. I can't kip when I'm trying to get over a wall. And that was always the thing that I would tell the young Marines about. Because I set a record in boot camp for the most pull-ups because I did over 50 pull-ups. They weren't real pull-ups, Maurice. I was kipping. I was swinging like a pendulum. Like these muscle-ups that people do minus the high bar.
Yeah.
I could teach you how to do it. It's just manipulating your body weight to get over a bar. I just knew how to do it because I was a rock climber. And I weighed like 98 pounds back then. That didn't help me when we were in my first deployment to Australia and I had to get over a reef wall because I couldn't kip over the reef wall. I needed to use pure upper body strength. That didn't help me when I was trying to get in and out of the Zodiac past the surf zone because you can't really kip underwater. So, to the old school people, we got rid of the kip, that's BS. Well, it's because we identified that that really wasn't a true testament of our upper body strength. So now all the changes that we do, we're getting better. There's still, the differences. I know a young Marine who could put almost any of the listeners to shame on a pull-up bar. This young lady is just physically fit. And yeah, can you credit her growing up in gymnastics? Can you credit her doing it? I could. But I could still say that there's a female out there that does twice as many pull-ups as I could ever do. Legit. To say that all females can't do the same standard, I disagree with that statement. When you use all, use that word all, in any regards, as a leader, when everybody, it's not true, not everybody. Not everybody. You have to understand that. People have to understand that.
Speaking of standards and leaders, what are your comments or thoughts on former Major General James Mattis' guidance? Do no harm.
In the wee mornings of sunrise in one of the deployments I had a young platoon commander, and we had countless conversations of this, right? Because we were still doing weapons caches, we were still doing the long range patrols in Afghanistan, and for every village that we went through, if we did harm, if we did more than what was necessary, if we did it in a way that was determined by the locals to be over, he would say that we've created 2 more terrorists. So in his communications with us as a platoon, right, the do no harm concept is you want to go in, you want to have people understand the process, the point. A lot of times you can't. So what you do is you minimize your impact on that area. You don't level a city because of one sniper. In doing so, and I'm not trying to overstep my bounds here, but I also think of it not just in a combat zone. If I have an administrative punishment that I have to impose on somebody, why do I always have to use a heavy hammer? There's other ways to do it. And the concept of to do no harm, you don't spray and pray when you get shot at. I have never witnessed a Marine simply close their eyes and pull the trigger until the magazine's empty. Maybe, again, I've been very lucky with the people that I've served with the units I've been at. You just don't do that. You know your target, you know what lies behind it, and you try to eliminate that threat. So to do no harm means that I'm only going after that threat. I'm not going to, like I said, blow up a whole town because of the one sniper. And in that, I think that is good philosophy. You don't want to salt the earth as the Romans did just to prove that they could, because that just creates more bad guys that no longer have any respect, or not necessarily respect in that example either, but that look now at you as being the enemy.
As we come here to a close, any particular guidance you'd like to give to those that are in the military or considering a career in the military?
I get to travel around now that I'm retired. I get to talk to families that I haven't talked to before, because just, second, third cousins, if you will. And they always tend to ask me, what would you give to a person who's getting ready to join the military? And I say, well, you know what I'd give them? I'd give them the same advice of the person who's getting ready to sign a 3-year contract with Walmart. Same advice that I'd give them to going down and joining that union, to get that union job that they're going to be stuck with paying union dues for X amount of years. Know what you're getting into. Don't ever look at that new assignment, that new billet, that new job, that new change in your life, believing what somebody has told you. The people who do that, the people who get into those situations, they end up regretting it. Because I promise you, no matter what you're doing, I don't care if you win the lottery tomorrow and you think your life is set. Win the lottery tomorrow. unlimited amount of dollars. Within the next year, you're going to have a crappy day. And when you have that crappy day, you're going to start internalizing those thoughts. You're going to think about the things that got you to that crappy day. When I talked to the Marines at the schoolhouses, I promised them that they were going to have plenty of crappy days. Plenty of days where they're just staring at the darkness of the sky, wondering why they are there and what they did. And I would hope that at that moment, it's because they made the decision, that they didn't listen to somebody else, that the promises that were provided. And everybody jokes about recruiters of all branches. Everybody jokes about headhunters within different corporations and, different entities of the DOD and the DOS. And, well, this is what I was not promised. Yeah, what you were promised and what you're looking to get out of. Think about that. Spend the extra 3 minutes in that quiet place, in your safe spot, and think about where you're going to be in 5 years by making the decision to do that job, to change your life in that way. And if in 5 years you have that goal, you're going into that change of environment, you're going into that new place, at least with your eyes open and focused on something.
And if there happens to be anyone serving at a much higher level in the military or government listening to this podcast, what would you ask them to keep in mind as they're making decisions, leading, that's going to have an impact on the entire organization under them?
I served with a number of phenomenal generals. There's one that sticks out the most when you ask me that question. And for anybody that has ever served with them, they'll know the quote. I would ask to them to take a walk around the fighting position. Take a walk around the fighting hole. And what was meant by that, not just in the military side of the house, but in corporate and federal, don't forget the basics of just taking a walk around the shop, taking a walk around the bullpen. When the general said that, it was on the idea that he would never forget that level of singular focus of attention of that fighting position and what it meant for the two people that were in it. The lower level, the guy in the mailroom for corporate America, that new agent in the Department of State. What's the impact of that decision going to have on them? And if you don't know the answer to that, or if you don't care to know the answer to that, then maybe you're not as good as a leader as you think you are. So always take a walk around the fighting hole. Always take a walk around the position. Before you make any great change, when you try to implement something, know what ripple effects are going to take place. And if you don't know, ask. So that's what I would say.
Spencer, I deeply appreciate this. You've given us a considerable amount of your time, and I'm sure this is going to benefit at least someone out there, whether it's just in their individual life or if they are in a position of responsibility, even immense responsibility. So on behalf of the listeners, but especially myself, I deeply appreciate your willingness to share your experiences and thoughts.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.